Pio of Pietrelcina, born as Francesco Forgione, widely known as Padre Pio, was an Italian Capuchin friar. Francesco Forgione was born to Grazio Mario Forgione and Maria Giuseppa di Nunzio, in Pietrelcina, a town in the province of Benevento, in the southern Italian region of Campania. His parents were peasant farmers. He was baptized in the nearby Santa Anna Chapel, which stands upon the walls of a castle. He later served as an altar boy in this same chapel. He had an older brother, Michele, and 3 younger sisters, Felicita, Pellegrina, and Grazia, who was later to become a Brigittine nun. His parents had 2 other children who died in infancy. When he was baptized, he was given the name Francesco. He stated that by the time he was 5 years old, he had already made the decision to dedicate his entire life to God. He worked on the land up to the age of 10, looking after the small flock of sheep the family owned. Pietrelcina was a town where feast days of saints were celebrated throughout the year, and the Forgione family was deeply religious. They attended Mass daily, prayed the Rosary nightly, and abstained from meat 3 days a week in honor of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. Although Francesco's parents and grandparents were illiterate, they narrated Bible stories to their children. According to the diary of Father Agostino da San Marco, who was later his spiritual director in San Marco in Lamis, the young Francesco was afflicted with a number of illnesses. At 6 he suffered from severe gastroenteritis. At 10 he caught typhoid fever. As a youth, Francesco reported that he had experienced heavenly visions and ecstasies. In 1897, after he had completed 3 years at the public school, Francesco was said to have been drawn to the life of a friar after listening to a young Capuchin who was in the countryside seeking donations. When Francesco expressed his desire to his parents, they made a trip to Morcone, a community 13 miles north of Pietrelcina, to find out if their son was eligible to enter the order. The friars there informed them that they were interested in accepting Francesco into their community, but he needed to be better educated. Francesco's father went to the United States in search of work to pay for private tutoring for his son, to meet the academic requirements to enter the Capuchin order. It was in this period that Francesco received the sacrament of confirmation on the 27th of September 1899. He underwent private tutoring and passed the stipulated academic requirements. On the 6th of January 1903, at the age of 15, he entered the Novitiate of the Capuchin friars at Morcone. On the 22nd of January, he took the Franciscan habit and the name of Friar Pio, in honor of Pope Pius I, whose relic is preserved in the Santa Anna Chapel in Pietrelcina. He took the simple vows of poverty, chastity and obedience. Commencing his 7-year study for the priesthood, Pio traveled to the friary of St. Francis of Assisi in Umbria. At 17, he fell ill, complaining of loss of appetite, insomnia, exhaustion, fainting spells, and migraines. He vomited frequently and could digest only milk and cheese. Religious devotees point to this time as being that at which inexplicable phenomena began to occur. During prayers, for example, Pio appeared to others to be in a stupor, as if he were absent. One of Pio's fellow friars later claimed to have seen him in ecstasy, and levitating above the ground. In June 1905, Pio's health worsened to such an extent that his superiors decided to send him to a mountain convent, in the hope that the change of air would do him good. This had little impact, however, and doctors advised that he return home. Even there his health failed to improve. Despite this, he still made his solemn profession on the 27th of January 1907. In August 1910, Pio was ordained a priest by Archbishop Paolo Scinosi at the Cathedral of Benevento. 4 days later, he offered his first Mass at the parish church of Our Lady of the Angels. His health being precarious, he was permitted to remain with his family in his hometown of Pietrelcina while still retaining the Capuchin habit. He stayed in Pietrelcina until 1916, due to his health and the need to take care of his family when his father and brother briefly emigrated to the United States. During these years, Padre Pio frequently wrote mystic letters to his spiritual directors, Father Benedetto and Father Agostino, 2 friars from the Capuchin monastery of San Marco in Lamis. On the 4th of September 1916, Pio was ordered to return to his community life. He moved to an agricultural community, Our Lady of Grace Capuchin Friary, located in the Gargano Mountains in San Giovanni Rotondo in the province of Foggia. At that time the community numbered 7 friars. He remained at San Giovanni Rotondo until his death in 1968, except for a period of military service. In the priesthood, Padre Pio was known to perform a number of successful conversions to Catholicism. Pio was devoted to rosary meditations. He compared weekly confession to dusting a room weekly, and recommended the performance of meditation and self-examination twice daily, once in the morning, as preparation to face the day, and once again in the evening, as retrospection. His advice on the practical application of theology he often summed up in his now famous quote, "Pray, hope, and don't worry." He directed Christians to recognize God in all things and to desire above all things to do the will of God. Many people who heard of him traveled to San Giovanni Rotondo to meet him and confess to him, ask for help, or have their curiosity satisfied. Pio's mother died at the village around the convent in 1928. Later, in 1938, Pio had his elderly father Grazio live with him. His brother Michel also moved in. Pio's father lived in a little house outside the convent, until his death in 1946. When World War I started, 4 friars from this community were selected for military service in the Italian army. At that time, Pio was a teacher at the seminary and a spiritual director. When one more friar was called into service, Pio was put in charge of the community. On the 15th of November 1915, he was drafted and on December 6, assigned to the 10th Medical Corps in Naples. Due to poor health, he was continually discharged and recalled until on the 16th of March 1918, he was declared unfit for service and discharged completely. In September 1918, Pio began to display permanent wounds on his hands and feet, known as stigmata in reference to the Christ's wounds. In the next months, his reputation of sainthood grew rapidly in the region of San Giovanni Rotondo, attracting hundreds of believers at the monastery coming each day to see him. People who had started rebuilding their lives after the war began to see in Pio a symbol of hope. Those close to him attest that he began to manifest several spiritual gifts, including the gifts of healing, bilocation, levitation, prophecy, miracles, extraordinary abstinence from both sleep and nourishment. One account states that Padre Agostino recorded one instance in which Pio was able to subsist for at least 20 days at Verafeno on only the Holy Eucharist without any other nourishment, the ability to read hearts, the gift of tongues, the gift of conversions, and pleasant-smelling wounds. Pio increasingly became well known among the wider populace. He became a spiritual director, and developed 5 rules for spiritual growth: weekly confession, daily communion, spiritual reading, meditation, and examination of conscience. By 1925, Pio had converted an old convent building into a medical clinic with a few beds intended primarily for people in extreme need. In 1940, a committee was set up to establish a bigger clinic and donations started to be made. Construction began in 1947. According to Luzzatto, the bulk of the money for financing the hospital came directly from Emanuele Brunetto, a keen follower of Pio, who had made his fortune in the black market in German-occupied France. The United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration, UNRRA, also contributed 250 million Italian lire. Lodovico Montini, head of Democrazia Cristiana, and his brother Giovanni Battista Montini, later Pope Paul VI, facilitated engagement by UNRRA. The hospital was initially to be named Fiorello LaGuardia, but eventually presented as the work of Pio himself. The Casa Sollievo della Sofferenza, home for the relief of suffering, opened in 1956. Pio handed direct control to the Holy See. However, in order that Pio might directly supervise the project, Pope Pius XII granted him a dispensation from his vow of poverty in 1957. Some of Pio's detractors have subsequently suggested there had been misappropriation of funds. Pio died on the 23rd of September 1968 at the age of 81. His health deteriorated in the 1960s, but he continued his spiritual works. On the 22nd of September 1968, Padre Pio celebrated the Mass to celebrate the 50th anniversary of his receiving the stigmata, with a huge crowd of pilgrims present to celebrate the event as well as television crews. Due to a large number of pilgrims present for the Mass, the superior of the monastery decided that a solemn Mass be celebrated. Pio carried out his duties but appeared extremely weak and frail. His voice was weak, and, after the Mass had concluded, he nearly collapsed while walking down the altar steps. He needed help from his Capuchin brothers. This was his last celebration of the Mass. Early in the morning of the 23rd of September 1968, Pio made his last confession and renewed his Franciscan vows. As was customary, he had his rosary in his hands, though he did not have the strength to pray the Hail Marys aloud, instead repeating the words Jesu, Maria, Jesus, Mary. At around 2:30 a.m., he died in his cell in San Giovanni Rotondo. A few days before dying, the stigmata had disappeared. Examining Padre Pio's body, the doctor who was present at his deathbed observed that the wounds of the stigmata were completely healed, without any trace or scar. His body was placed in coffin in the church of the monastery to allow pilgrims to pay their respects. The funeral ceremony was held on the 26th of September, with an estimated 1 lakh people attending. After a funeral procession in San Giovanni Rotondo and the funeral mass, the body was buried in the crypt in the Church of Our Lady of Grace. He is venerated as a saint in the Catholic Church, celebrated on the 23rd of September.